Okay, I think we're about ready to get started. We've got everybody joined in. Thank you for joining us again on this Monday of Corona quarantine. Unfortunately, we can't go out to schools and teach like I typically do, but I'm happy to be here and do some Facebook Live video presentations for you. So as I said before, my name is John Gutzeit. I'm a conservation educator with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I've been working with the department since 2010. Actually, this week is a 10-year anniversary for me. I started with fisheries, or doing an aquatic specialist in 2010, and I've done a lot of different jobs through the years. But what I do now as a conservation educator, if you've not heard any of our Facebook Live talks, is we'll spend the entire school year going around to different schools around the state. I'm based around Jefferson County, and we'll speak on conservation, we'll speak on hunting, fishing, conservation camps, and my schools will see me about 5 or 6 times through that school year. The last presentation I'll give is on Camp Earl Wallace. Now, if you haven't heard of Camp Wallace, it's a great place for kids to go learn how to canoe, learn how to drive a motorboat, shoot a bow and arrow, shoot a shotgun, all kinds of cool stuff they can learn down at camp, and that's where we spend our entire summer coordinating those things. So if we ever are allowed to get back outside and do those kind of cool things, we will also have summer camp if you all want to sign up for that. But today, what we're going to be talking about are reptiles and amphibians. And when I speak, there it goes, on reptiles and amphibians, it's got a big, long, sciencey name that we give it. It's called herpetology. Now, when we talk about herpetology, I know it's a big, long, nerdy science word. That is the study of frogs, toads, salamanders, snakes, lizards, turtles, all of these different creepy crawly guys that can sometimes be thought of as slimy or a little bit weird looking. So we're talking all about herpetology today. Impress your friends and family with all your big nerdy science words I'm going to give you. All right? Now, if we classify these guys, go through these, we have lots of different kinds of frogs, lots of different kinds of salamanders, but I'm going to start with our amphibians. And when we talk about amphibians, these guys, we're going to break that word down. What does that mean? They've got 2 different parts to their life. They're going to start out as a tadpole with some kind of weird ears or legs swimming in the water, and eventually they grow up and they develop lungs. They develop legs where they can walk around. Their tail looks different. So an amphibian, if you break that down, you're going to learn some Greek today. You probably didn't realize. It means having 2 modes of existence, 2 parts to their life. So if we talk about toads, frogs, salamanders, any of those kind of guys, they start out in the water with little weird tails, or just a face and a tail swimming around, and they grow up, they grow legs, they grow lungs, they move on to land. So amphibian, 2 parts to their life. Some of the adaptations that you will see with these guys, they're covered in a mucus. And if you ever pick up like a frog or a salamander, it feels like a big greasy booger. That mucus helps them to survive. It helps to keep them moist so they can breathe. Some of these guys breathe through their skin. It also helps them to escape if there's any kind of predators looking for them. Okay? So they're also great swimmers. That mucus helps them to slide through the water and evade predators there as well. So if we talk about how these guys live, we're just coming now out of wintertime. They're either going to hibernate or estivate. Now, estivation is another one of those science words you may not have heard before, but we know hibernation happens when? In the wintertime. Estivation happens in the summertime. These guys have to stay moist, they have to stay covered in that gross mucus to be able to survive, right? So that's when they estivate. As far as when they breed, when they have their babies, if we're talking about salamanders, we're talking about toads, talking about frogs, these guys are going to breed usually around the springtime. Typically, a lot of heavy rain will turn on that breeding mechanism. They think, okay, I got to go find a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, go fall in love, have kids, have a family, right? But if you are this spring or summertime out running around the creek, running around the pond with your buddies, and you just find a big old goo ball of jelly, those are frog eggs. That's what they look like. So you can identify them, know what they look like. Please be delicate with these dudes because they're just fragile little marbles. Okay, don't pop them, don't step on them, definitely don't eat them. But those are frog eggs. If you want to identify toad eggs, these guys come in long strings. It's going to be a long strand of little marbles. And if you want to see salamander eggs, that's what these guys look like. And they're all going to breed typically around some kind of water source, typically around either a vernal pool or a creek, pond area like that. That's where those tadpoles are going to grow up and eventually, like we said, develop those lungs, develop legs, and grow into adult forms of whatever they're about to be, right? As far as the ecological role of our amphibians, whether it be salamanders, toads, or frogs, a lot of different kinds of wildlife depend on them as a food source. Salamanders are the most common vertebrae in forested areas. You may not see them very often. They're hiding under a lot of leaf cover, under a lot of different, like tree bark, that kind of thing. But a lot of different kinds of wildlife depend on those salamanders, right? So they do a huge job in our food chain and our food web. If we didn't have those amphibians, we'd probably end up breaking down. So that's a lot of information to throw at you. I don't want to throw you under the bus quite yet. Do we have any questions coming in yet before I keep going?
Yes, we have a few. So Clayton, age 9, wants to know, are any salamanders poisonous?
So we're going to get into the difference between poisonous and venomous. Anything you see as far as salamanders out around the creek, out around the pond, you can pick those up. It's going to be fine. You just want to make sure you wash your hands after you pick them up, because after you pick them up, you got all this goo on your hands, right? They're covered in mucus. So you go home with your goo hands and you stick them in your French fries, and you got your goo fries, and you stick them in your mouth. That's not going to be good, right? So you can pick up any salamander you want here in the state. They're not going to hurt you. They're not going to be poisonous. Just after you do, wash your hands, which we're all very rehearsed on, I think now, right? We all wash our hands all the time. So, anything else?
Got one more. Amelia, age 7, wants to know, how do turtles go in their shell?
So how do turtles go in their shell? That is an excellent question. A lot of people might have the misconception turtles can drop their shell like a hermit crab or leave. That's not true. Turtles stay in their shell. Their skeleton is fused to that shell. That's their defense against any kind of predators or that kind of thing, right? So those guys are going to stay in their shell all the time. They can retract their skin. It's real wrinkly. They can pull back into their shell, but they're never going to be able to leave that behind, okay? So I appreciate that. What I'm going to do is jump into our salamanders, though. Some that you might see around your state, around your backyard, that you might be able to find. Now, the first one I've got for you is what's called an amphiumus. Now, amphiumus are really cool because they're the largest salamander we've got here in the state. These guys can grow up to 3.5 feet long. So they can get really large, but you're only going to find them typically in far western Kentucky, really far out in the west part of the state. That's where we can potentially see them. These guys are not poisonous, they're not venomous, but they do have a bite. If you try and pick them up, they could possibly bite you. Don't pick them up. It'll feel like a big slippery pool noodle, kind of. And if you do look at their body, just how they're shaped, you can see that these guys spend most of their life in the water. They've got a big tail, they're able to swim, and they've got itty bitty little legs, right? These guys are not big, long wiener dogs. They can't run around on the land very well. So they spend the majority of their lifetime in the water swimming around. So they don't run very fast. Next guy I got for you. Now, these guys are brook salamanders. Now, a brook salamander is going to be found either near the mouth of a cave in what's called the twilight zone, where it's always going to be kind of shaded. It's always going to be a little bit protected. You could find them in mossy areas, around woodlands, anywhere there's going to be a little bit of a water source or any kind of puddles that they can live near, because these guys have to stay moist. They have to stay wet, right, to keep that mucus covering their body. Really pretty salamanders, bright colors, bright spots on them. I can move also to climbing salamanders. Now, a climbing salamander, you're going to see them more around cliff edges or in trees. They're called a climbing salamander because this guy has what's called a prehensile tail. Now, that's another big, long, nerdy word for you, but a prehensile tail means they can wrap that tail around a branch. It helps them to be able to climb whatever they're on or hang on to whatever they're on. They can evade predators and hang out. So that prehensile tail helps them out. Now, dusky salamanders are also very common. You can find them around mossy areas, wooded areas, underneath leaves. Right now, this time of year when we get a lot of rainfall and we've got a lot of leaves down on the forest floor, that's where these guys like to hang out, in between those layers of leaves that have fallen down. So those are our dusky salamanders as well. A really cool one I like, it's the little itty bitty guy. It's what's called the four-toed salamander. These guys, the largest they ever grow is right around 2 inches long. They're not very big. So the four-toed salamander, it's going to be tough to find because he's so small. But if a predator does find him, a cool trick he's got is he can disconnect his tail. He can flex his butt muscles real hard, and then that tail will fall off. And what happens is the tail keeps wiggling, keeps flicking back and forth to attract that predator to that movement where he says, please don't kill me, just eat my tail, leave me alone, right? So that's the four-toed salamander. Another cool guy I got for you. If we compare that to one of our largest salamanders we've got, that's the eastern hellbender. Now, with a name like hellbender, you think this guy might be poisonous or deadly, or he's gonna kill you. That's not true. The eastern hellbender is a really neat salamander for a couple reasons. These guys can grow over 30 years old, so they get pretty old, and they can be up to around 16, 20 inches in between that area. They get pretty big. Hellbenders can grow large. They eat mostly crayfish, and you'll find them in clear, cold, rocky streams. That's where you're going to find a hellbender. Now, these guys are not as common as they used to be because they need that clean stream. They need that habitat that they're going to live in. Okay? So if you ever see a hellbender out in the wild, it's a pretty special experience. We don't see them very often. Okay? But that's the eastern hellbender. We do lots of studies on them at the Department of Fish and Wildlife. We try and take care of them all the time. So there's those guys. One salamander that is confused for a hellbender a lot is a water dog or a mud puppy. And the reason for that is they have these external gills. See these big weird ears he's got on him right here on the side of their head? That's how they breathe. That's how they absorb oxygen straight out of the water, just like a fish has gills. That's how those guys breathe. And you can see he's got that big paddle on his tail. He's got that big fat tail to swim around. These guys are going to be typically found in the water, found around some kind of stream or pond or that kind of thing. Okay? And the last ones I got for you are woodland salamanders. Now, just as their name says, you're going to find them around forested areas, around leaf coverings, like a Worley's salamander or an eastern zigzag salamander. These guys are going to be anywhere around the woods where you've got some kind of water source nearby, around a pond, around some kind of puddle, known as a vernal pool, right, is where they could live. Okay. Now, moving on, we're going to go into frogs and toads next. Do we have any other salamander questions before I keep moving?
We do. So we had someone who is 11. They didn't leave a name, but they want to know, how long do salamanders live?
Well, that depends on the species. It's a great question. How long do salamanders live? The oldest one we have here in Kentucky, like I was talking about, is that eastern hellbender. And we do have a couple here at the Salado Center. If you all ever come visit, come check them out. But they're shy today. They're hiding underneath the rocks. We really can't see them right now. But typically, you can see those eastern hellbenders right here at Salado.
And then Rachel wants to know, how many species of salamanders do we have in Kentucky?
Several. I think we've got 24 species of salamanders. Lori, can you help me with that?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
24 species is what comes to my head, but I don't want to go on record and be wrong. So what I tell all my students is it's not my job to let you know everything I know about wildlife. It's to get you interested enough to find it out for yourself. So whoever comments first on the Facebook Live video, how many salamanders we have in Kentucky, you'll get a virtual high five from me, Corona quarantine certified, no touching, right? I believe it's 24 though. But we're going to move into the frog and toad habitat and where you're going to find these guys. Frogs and toads are extremely common. You see them all over the planet. They're on every continent. These guys, though, are mistaken for each other a lot of times. Now, the largest frog we've got here in Kentucky is going to be the bullfrog. Y'all see, these guys can grow up to about 8 inches or even bigger. Bullfrog is going to be who you're looking for also if you like to eat frog legs. So you ever had frog legs before? They're delicious. Give them a try. But you want to see a bullfrog over here. He's hiding out. All of our amphibians are being a little bit shy today, but here's a bullfrog right here in the bottom corner on this rock. If you guys check him out, that's who's going to be making those big, loud, bellowing sounds out around the summertime, around a pond, if you want to go out frog gigging, that kind of thing. So those big, deep rivets that you hear around waterways. So there's a bullfrog for you. Now, the other frogs that you're going to hear this time of year, like a chorus frog or a peeper, these guys are going to be very loud out in the trees calling, saying, hey, ladies, listen how good I sing. They're looking for boyfriends and girlfriends, right? So a chorus frog, they're going to be pretty tiny in size. They don't get very big. They'll be a couple inches long. But you're definitely going to be able to hear if they're in your area. If you're in the woods or on the border of woods, that's where they're going to hang out. Cricket frogs, like a Blanchard's or a northern cricket frog, these guys have a different call. They sound a lot like a cricket. They've got like a little trill they make. So if you hear that noise, you know you have cricket frogs somewhere around your area of where you're hanging out. Now, with these frogs, just like our salamanders, they're going to be covered in mucus. They're going to be a little bit more slimy, a little tough to catch, right? If you try and grab one, they're going to be slick, okay? Now, if we're going into tree frogs, like a Cope's gray tree frog, this one's a little bit more common you might see. Something cool about them is this on the left here, this is a female. And these are all Cope's gray tree frogs. When we put them on the same background in the same area, they start to change their colors to look like each other, right? So a little bit of a disguise, a little bit of a chameleon effect where they can change those colors on them. Pretty cool. When we get into our true frogs, that's our bullfrogs, that's green frogs, these guys that you're going to see on the edge of ponds or the edge of creeks. If you're ever walking around the edge of a pond and you see a bunch of these guys jumping in, that's typically going to be either a green frog or a bullfrog. And I've got a green frog behind me in the very back. There we go, I found him. In the back corner. You see him back there? So that's the green frogs and bullfrogs. Those are the dudes that you're going to see if you're ever going out and you want to go frog gigging or just go out and spend some time out around the pond fishing. You'll see a lot of those guys. Okay? Now, a defense that they've got is if they feel threatened, they're going to puff their body up and puff out their chest and their cheeks and try and look big and bad, right? They want to look bigger than that predator. Or they at least want to look big enough to where that snake or that predator isn't going to be able to swallow them. So that's another trick that a bullfrog or a green frog is going to try and pull. Okay? Now, moving from frogs to toads, there's a difference. If you see a frog, they'll be covered in mucus, they're slimy, they've got long legs, they can jump a really long distance. A toad, a lot of times, is going to be just a short little fat guy, short little legs, and they're actually dry and bumpy. They're not going to be slimy like those other amphibians. So the first toad I've got for you, pretty cool guy, is going to be a southern spadefoot. Now, a southern spadefoot, his cool trick, he's got a shovel on his foot. Like I said, spadefoot, right? This big long toenail at the bottom of the screen. He forgot to cut his toenails. What they'll do is dig that down into the ground and push that dirt out of the way and back up to where they can hide. They can hide from predators, they can hide from food, whatever they're going to do. They could hibernate. That's how they use that back foot, is to dig out a little spot to get down there and hide in the ground. Next one I've got for you is, as far as our true toad category, is going to be a Fowler's toad. Now, 9 times out of 10, if you see a toad around your landscaping, around the driveway, around the bushes, it's going to be a Fowler's toad. We see them all over the place. I've got a really tough time. I feel like I accidentally step on one almost every year. But if you find a toad, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be this guy right here, that Fowler's toad. The other really common one we've got is the American toad. And I've got a couple of these dudes over here in my case, right here in front of me. So the one in front, the larger one, is that American toad. And the one sitting back in the water, in the back in the puddle, that's that Fowler's toad. So these guys do look pretty similar. They look pretty common, just as far as kind of a desert camo brown speckles on them. But that Fowler's toad, like I said, that's the really common one that you're typically going to find. Okay? So if we go into the main differences between our frogs, between our toads. Toads, dry, bumpy, short, fat little legs, right? Frogs would be long, skinny, they got those slick legs, they can jump a long way, and they can typically swim a lot better than a toad can, okay? Do we have any questions coming in before I skip to the next?
Well, so we did have a bunch of people chiming in with that correct answer of how many salamanders.
Okay, how many salamanders we got?
35, and the first person to get it right was Stacy, so virtual high five, Stacy.
High five, good job.
And then we just got in a question from Clayton, age 9. How do you know if it's a boy or a girl toad?
You got to look really close, Clayton, to know if it's a boy or girl toad. It just depends. Or if it is going to be during their breeding season, one's going to be laying the eggs, and then you know that's the female, right?
All right. And then Mabel, age 5, wants to know, are frogs and toads friends?
Frogs and toads are best of friends. They'll hang out all the time. They're in the same habitat, so I'm sure they hang out when it's not coronavirus quarantine time. Okay, so moving on to our myths about amphibians, things that people will tell you a lot of times that just simply aren't true. Hellbenders being venomous, not true. If you do pick up a hellbender, number one, we said that's not very common, but just make sure that you wash your hands after you pick them up. And one that I hear all the time is toads are going to give you warts. If you pick up a toad or a frog, mom and dad's going to say, put that down, you're going to get warts. That is not true. Frogs and toads don't carry warts. They're not going to make your hands all full of bumps. What they will do if you pick up a frog or a toad is they're going to get scared because you look like a big scary predator. So what they are going to do is they're going to pee on your hands. So what you want to do before you go to McDonald's and get your fries and eat with your stinky pee-pee hands, what you want to do, wash your hands. Always wash your hands after you pick up a frog, after you pick up a toad. They're not going to hurt you. They're not poisonous. Just make sure you wash those hands, okay? Okay, moving into our reptiles. Now the difference, main difference between a reptile and an amphibian is a reptile is going to be dry and scaly. These guys are going to have different kinds of patterns. They are not going to have that mucus covering their body, okay? So if we go to our reptiles, they have all kinds of different coloration, all kinds of different patterns. They're going to have teeth, so that's different. But these guys are also known as what's called ectothermic. So I told you we're going to have some big nerdy words in here. If we go to ectothermic, what that means is they're cold-blooded. So if this snake or turtle or any kind of reptile wants to be warm, it has to find a warm place to get. If it's going to be cold outside, they're going to be cold. So that ambient temperature of their surrounding environment dictates their internal temperature. So if anybody says something's cold-blooded, like they're mean and they're hateful, they're no good, that's not true. They're ectothermic, okay? These guys are still friends with frogs and toads and all that kind of stuff, okay? Some adaptations these guys have, those scales are going to protect them while they're out in the wild, while they're in their habitat. They're going to have strong, sharp claws in lizards. They're going to have more teeth, more varieties of colors. And how they live through the wintertime, through summertime, they also go through what's called hibernation and estivation. So hibernation happens in the wintertime, we've mentioned before, right? If these guys are ectothermic, they've got to find a den or someplace to snuggle up and live for that wintertime. Estivation happens through the summertime. If it's too dry and they're not able to survive, estivation is just like hibernation, but happens in the summer. Now, some biologists that you talk to might say this is called brumation, because brumation is more specific to reptiles. A lot of our mammals, when they hibernate, they depend on a fat reserve to make it through that wintertime. Like a bear has to get big and fat before it goes into hibernation. Reptiles, they don't have those fat reserves, so it's not exactly the same. They go through brumation, where they're just very sluggish. They don't move around very much. Or if it's an aquatic species, they could be active through the year, just depending where they live. Okay, so brumation is a better scientific name if you want to get into the nerdy nuts and bolts of how our amphibians work. As far as their reproduction and their growth, our reptiles lay eggs. And when they go out and lay eggs, they're going to find some kind of den to hang out, make sure those eggs hatch safely, and then typically they're going to leave. So any kind of snake or lizard or anything like that, when they're born out of that egg, they're on their own. There's no mommies and daddies. The only kind of caveat to that is when our venomous snakes have babies, when they first hatch, sometimes they'll hang out, like our timber rattlesnake or our copperhead. Those guys will hang out for a little bit longer than you would with some of these other snakes. So right when they're born, they're kicked out of the house, they're off on their own. You got to go learn to drive on your own and go find your own friends, right? So no mommies and daddies with our reptiles. Something weird though about when they do have their babies is the ambient temperature during gestation, so that means when the snakes are pregnant, is going to determine the sex of those young. So what that means is if it's colder out or it's warmer out during gestation, then there could be more boy snakes being born that spring or more girl snakes being born that spring. And it's kind of split. There's either later spring or late summer. That's when those younger new snakes are going to be born. Okay? So that's when you're going to be looking out for those nests and those snakes to be hatched. So let's move over here to our poisonous versus venomous snakes. It's okay. So when we talk about poison versus venom, a lot of people say, don't touch a snake, it might be poisonous. Now that's not true. There are no poisonous snakes here in Kentucky. We do have venomous snakes. And the difference between that, if something's poisonous, it has to be ingested and go through your digestive tract, right? And venomous snake has venom glands in their head, or zoom in on our timber rattler here, where you can see these venom sacs in the back of his head. That's where he holds that kind of defense mechanism. He'll be able to bite, and those fangs are like hypodermic needles. They can inject that venom straight into your bloodstream. So if something's venomous, it injects venom. If something's poisonous, you have to ingest whatever it is. An easy way to remember this is poison, you bite, venom, they bite, right? So, quick way to remember that. If we can go back over this way a little bit. So, as far as our venomous snakes go, step back here, only have 4 venomous snakes here in our state. It's going to be the copperhead, the timber rattlesnake, the western cottonmouth, and the western pygmy rattlesnake. Besides those, all of our other snakes are non-venomous. Now, that does not mean that other snakes will not bite. They could potentially bite you, but the easiest way to avoid being bitten by a snake is leave them alone. Don't try to pick them up, okay? How you're going to be able to identify these venomous versus non-venomous snake. A venomous snake has what's called a vertical pupil. It's like a cat eye, a slit that goes up and down, okay? They're also going to have a head that's shaped a little bit differently. It's shaped kind of like a heart or like a triangle. So they've got these big lobes, these big venom sacs in the back of their head. And something that's a little tougher to see, it's a little weirder, is the scales on their tail are going to be in one band. It's one row of scales going down their tail. If you compare that to a non-venomous snake, they've got alternating scales going down their tail, so it goes kind of back and forth. But those are all kind of very specific details. Just because you know these and you can identify a venomous snake, does that mean I want you to go out and pick up every single snake you see and get right in his face and say, hey dude, are you venomous? No, because that's the easiest way to get bit by any kind of snake, whether it's venomous or not. So you're going to be able to see the shape of their head and their eyes from far away. Leave them where they are. They're there to find small mammals to eat or something like that. So leave them alone and they're not going to bother you. As long as you watch where you step while you're out hiking and you're not trying to pick them up, they want to be off away from you, okay? So if you are bitten by a venomous snake, I'll go through this really quickly. There are all kinds of myths about what you should do. People say you should put some ice on it. You should tie a tourniquet. You should try to suck the venom out with your mouth. None of those are true. Please don't do that. The only thing you need to do if you're bit by a venomous snake is remain calm and you all can find a doctor. The other thing people say, try to catch the snake so you can show them what bit you. Don't do that. The only thing that's going to do is that snake will bite you again because you tried to pick him up again. Please leave them alone. Okay? Bit by a venomous snake, stay calm. You can head out to a doctor, find some medical professional, but far and away, you're going to be fine. Statistically, it's very, very rare somebody needs to be hospitalized by a venomous snake bite. Okay? Typically, that's going to happen to if you're holding a venomous snake as a pet illegally, and you like picking it up and cuddling with it, and they bite you in the head, and you think, I don't want to get in trouble, so you stay home, then that venom might affect you, right? But otherwise, just leave them where they are. Stay calm, see the doctor, okay? So, any questions? Typically that gets a lot of questions as far as snake bites and things like that.
We do have some snake questions. Zach and Callie want to know if cold-blooded reptiles move slower in cold weather.
Whenever there's going to be cold weather, whenever there's going to be that brumation period, they're going to be very sluggish. They don't want to move around very quickly. They just want to stay where they're at. So, yeah, that could be true.
And Sawyer, age 10, wants to know, why do snakes like to swallow their food whole?
Very good question, Sawyer. So, snakes do not have teeth like you and I do. They're going to have those fangs in their mouth, and they can disarticulate that jaw. They can open that to swallow an egg, swallow a toad, something that's much bigger than their head, right? So that's why they're going to swallow that whole, is they can't chew food up like you and I can. It's just not possible. But they have that special adaptation to disarticulate that jaw, okay? Thanks, I appreciate that. So if we get into some of the snakes you could see around Kentucky, the first guy I've got for you is what's known as a black king snake. Now this guy's the king, not because he wears a little tiny crown and slithers around, but it's because he can eat other snakes. More specifically, he can eat other venomous snakes. He is immune to their venom. But if you look at his eye right here, does he have that vertical pupil? No, he's got a round pupil just like you and I. So you know he's non-venomous, but he's able to eat other venomous snakes, which is pretty cool, right? A very common snake, one that you're gonna see probably in your backyard, is a black rat snake. Now these guys are all over the place, and they can be the largest snake in Kentucky. The largest one we've seen is 8.5 feet long. So these guys can grow really, really large. They're typically gonna eat small mammals like field mice, smaller squirrels, things like that. But if you see this guy's eye, it's got that circular pupil, also non-venomous. So please leave him alone, don't go out. You'll hear somebody say the only good snake is a dead snake. That's not true. We need these guys for our ecosystem to thrive, for our food web to work like it's supposed to, okay? So just leave them alone and they'll be fine. If you do try to pick up a black rat snake, they can potentially bite you if you try and pick them up. But what they'll also do is release a really stinky musk. They'll basically pee all over your hands and arms, and it's gross. So they're gonna bite you and pee on you. Just put them down. Don't pick them up. Go home, wash your hands, you'll be fine, okay? Now, the first venomous snake I've got for you, I'm going to step back over to my snake tank here, is a copperhead. This is the most common venomous snake across Kentucky, and I've got him up here at the top. So, copperhead, they don't get that large. They don't grow nearly as big as a timber rattlesnake, but these guys do not want to be around you. As far as their defense mechanism, these guys are going to try and move away as quick as they can first. If you keep chasing them, trying to hug them and kiss them, whatever you're going to do, then they're going to draw back and rely on their camouflage and say, please just don't look at me, please leave me alone. If you continue to poke them with a stick or try and pick them up or whatever you're doing that's wrong, then there's a chance they could bite you. Now something I want to let you know, a lot of times a venomous snake, when they bite, they'll give what's called a dry bite or a dry strike, because that venom, they use that to hunt for their food. That's how they eat and how they survive. They can look at you or look at me and know that you are way too big to eat. There's no way they can fit you in their mouth, right? Oh, cool. So when they look at you, they're just gonna give a strike that says, hey dude, this is what my teeth feel like, please back up because I don't wanna use my venom on you, okay? So a lot of times if you ever come in contact with a venomous snake, it's potentially a dry bite, just another reason to calm down and don't lose your cool if you see a venomous snake. Leave them alone and they'll leave you alone, okay? The next one I've got for you is what's called a corn snake. Now, a corn snake has really pretty colors on them. We've got all kinds of different patterns that are gonna be on these guys, and he may try to look venomous or have different patterns on him. This guy is non-venomous. He's got that circular pupil, that circular eye, another one of those that just try to look intimidating, but really isn't. The eastern garter snake. Now, this is a very common snake with a case of mistaken identity. A lot of people call him a gardener snake because it's true. A lot of times you can find them in the garden, out on your tomato plants or on your zucchini or something. But this guy is the eastern garter snake. So when you see him, you can identify and know what his true name is, okay? These guys eat a lot of roaches, which is kind of cool, a benefit to have around, a lot of different kinds of insects. So eastern garter snakes, they're good for your plants, good for your garden. Let them hang out, let them live, okay? The eastern hognose snake. Now this guy has a lot of cool different adaptations. A hognose is actually one of the only snakes that can dig his own burrow. He's got kind of a sharp snout on him, so he can dig out his own space where he's going to be able to live. And he also eats a lot of frogs, a lot of toads. They've got special fangs, special teeth in the back of their mouth that when they bite into a frog or a toad that's inflated themselves, made themselves look big and bad, they can deflate that frog or that toad, and that's how they eat them, right? This guy also can kind of expand his head and expand his body trying to intimidate a predator. So they look kind of like a cobra sometimes. Now the northern pine snake, this guy is very cool. He'll try to imitate a, excuse me, a timber rattlesnake. These guys can be found in eastern Kentucky like Macquarie County or even far western Kentucky. Sadly, typically we find them hit by an ATV or hit by a dirt bike or something like that out on trails, but they're going to be around drier areas. So just watch out if you're out mountain biking or you're out riding your four-wheeler, because we see a lot of these guys, but a lot of times we find them when they're dead. Now, the northern scarlet snake has a very cool adaptation. He tries to look like something else. He tries to mimic the coral snake. And there's a little rhyme that goes along with him. This guy's non-venomous. You can see he's got that circular pupil. But when you see red on black, the saying says, friend of Jack. So red on black, friend of Jack. Then red on yellow, a coral snake, kill a fellow. So if you see a coral snake, it's got red on yellow. But red on black, friend of Jack, red on yellow, kill a fellow. You can remember that rhyme and know which one's venomous and which one's not, okay? Now, northern water snake, these guys are all over the place, and this is another case of mistaken identity. People will say this is a cottonmouth, or they might say that's a water moccasin. Now, there is no true species called a water moccasin, okay? This northern water snake, they are very curious. They a lot of times will swim up to your canoe or to your kayak and just kind of get a look at you and swim off. So these guys are non-venomous. Leave them alone. Don't lose your cool and think they're going to try to be best friends with you and cuddle up. They'll leave you alone as long as you leave them alone. Okay? But they are very curious as far as looking around where you're at. Now, one of the smaller snakes we've got, this is the only one I'm going to endorse that you are allowed to pick up, is a ringneck snake. You can find them around dead, rotten tree bark or dead, rotten leaves. These guys will grow up to around maybe between 6 and 8 inches, somewhere in that area, and typically they're not going to bite you. And even if they do, if you feel their mouth pinching on your finger, there's no teeth that's going to hurt you. You're going to be fine. So the ringneck snake, that's the only one I'll tell you, is absolutely safe. You can pick them up if you absolutely can't stand it and you have to pick up a snake. But just to reiterate, like I'd said before, the easiest way not to be bit by a snake is please don't pick them up, okay? Now, the rough green snake is another smaller snake. You'll find them living in bushes. You'll find them living in treetops. They eat a lot of different kinds of bugs and spiders and crickets and that kind of thing. So they're not going to be very aggressive or be trying to bite you or anything like that. These guys are friendly, so make sure you don't go out and look for them. Okay, so we talked about the timber rattlesnake already, western cottonmouth. Do we have any questions?
We have a couple. So Jensen wants to know, do you have a favorite snake?
Do I have a favorite snake? I really like the timber rattlesnake. I like him for he's one of the oldest snakes in Kentucky. They can live up to 25 years old. These guys are one of the largest. They can grow up to 6 feet long. Really neat snake, and they warn you if you get too close. They've got a rattle on their tail, so if you hear that, you know, maybe I should look down at my feet and make sure I'm not standing on my buddy's head or too close to his area.
And then last one, Gideon, age 8. Do people ever mistake salamanders for snakes?
You could potentially mistake a salamander for a snake, but if you look, salamanders are always going to have legs, and snakes, they don't have any legs. The only one that you could mistake back and forth is actually, the last thing I'll give you today, is a slender glass lizard. Now, a slender glass lizard is the longest lizard in Kentucky. These guys can grow up to 3.5 feet long, but they don't have any legs. They just slither through tall, grassy areas. The reason that makes them not a snake is they have eyelids. Snakes don't have eyelids, and their scale structure is going to be a little bit different, okay? So the slender glass lizard, you can mistake him as a snake, but probably not a salamander, okay? So I appreciate you hanging out with us today. We'll have some more Facebook Live videos coming to you, and make sure you keep sending your questions in. If I don't get to all of them, later on today I'll try and answer a couple more on Facebook. So I thank you all for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.